Hello and welcome to my channel, Beat Slavery with Racha. My name is Racha Haffar, and today I have my guest with me, Nada, who is actually working on human trafficking in Egypt. Nada, welcome today. It's really a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you.
Since today our episode is about talking about what human trafficking is in the Middle East, so we picked you in Egypt. We wanted to know about your work and your organization. Can you share with us, just introduce yourself and tell us who you are and what do you do and why are you in Egypt?
So my name is Nada Nashat. I work for the Center for Egyptian Women's Legal Assistance. I'm the Advocacy Coordinator, and our organization basically works on combating violence against women, including domestic forms of trafficking in women and people in general. The reason why we're so interested in this specific work is that trafficking in the domestic sphere, in the family, is not seen as trafficking. And this is the problem, meaning that one of the most common forms of trafficking, for example, is that those little girls who are married off to more wealthy people, much older people, yet not the community and the state, they don't see them as victims of trafficking. Although we have a very good law on like combating trafficking, but the problem is, since no one is really well aware of such law, and there is no, even the prosecution or the police, for example, they are trained enough to use this law for domestic trafficking forms, many trafficking cases get lost in the field of family laws, for example, or for the person status law. So we decided that we need to work on this, highlight the issue that there are domestic forms that usually the law does not tackle them as trafficking, and they are essential and they are in the core of the society and the problems around us.
That's amazing. So can you tell us more about how did you actually start working in this? Like, how did you get involved in this? Were you one of the founders of the program, or how did you pick to work on this? Like, what is your attachment to the topic?
Okay, so personally, I'm not a founder. I just came along with the team to work on trafficking. For me personally, it was the fact that, as I said, there are certain cases that you can't just say that this is a problem of forced marriage. It's not just forced marriage. There are so much layers that the activists, the community, the state itself, they need to see the layers of violence that women and little girls are facing. And sometimes it doesn't have to be in the form of marrying off or forced marriage. It can be in a form of forced labor, for example. We have like, it's a massive percentage of women, around maybe like 70 or 60% of women who work in the domestic field are actually forced to work in such field. And by forced, I mean they are forced by their families or by the husband, whom at the end of the day, they take these women's money, and the women, they don't get the fruits of such labor. And they get, they get subjected to all sorts of violence, all sorts of harassment, rape, sometimes sexual violence, all of these layers, with the absence of law that protects domestic workers in Egypt as well. That makes them more prone and more vulnerable, what we call them more vulnerable to trafficking in general. So for me and the rest of the team at my organization, we felt that we need to shed light on that. We have to put domestic sphere on the agenda of the state and on the women's rights movements as well.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And what are the different other types of trafficking that you can see in Egypt more specifically?
So in Egypt more specifically, so forced labor, especially in the domestic fields, so domestic workers, this is one of the most prevailing form. For example, forced marriages as well, and early marriages, especially to older people coming from certain areas in the MENA region. Other forms, for example, that includes I don't know how to describe that, but it's more of with the refugees. Of course, this is also a huge percentage, with especially that Egypt has a large number of refugees. Yes, it's not as large as in other areas or other countries, yet especially refugees from the African continent, they are also more vulnerable to trafficking cases. And also it will come in the form of domestic work or forced domestic work and domestic labor. These are the most two or three forms that we usually, this is like there is a pattern in the cases we see, especially with women and children in that matter. And this is what we're trying to focus on.
And what about child begging in the streets, or children selling, let's say, illegal products, or like the parallel market, black market?
Yeah, sure. This
Too.
is also sort of another form of domestic trafficking, if we can call it so. But we categorize that under the forced labor, because it's not only begging. For example, you will find parents and families taking girls out of school, forcing them to beg in the street, to work as sex workers, for example, to get married, to the what we call the summer marriage. So basically, this is not a marriage per se; it's just a sex work with with a marriage contract. So women or girls get married to multiple men within very short time. Like we had a case where a 16-year-old, she was married to 3 different guys within 10 days.
Oh my God. So her dad gets the money?
The dad gets the money, and the whole family gets the money, but it's mainly the dad. And they usually come from a very, very poor family, and they are extremely underprivileged. And there is no proper education sometimes that helps these women whether protect themselves or know the means to report such violations. So we face different and multiple layers, and sometimes one of the most difficult layer here is that the women and girls themselves, they don't see this kind of violence as trafficking as well.
Yeah.
And this is the main issue, because they think it's a family matter. They think it's because my father is a bad guy, or my mom is the bad guy in the family. This usually it turns in the form of the family law framework, or the person status law framework. So this what makes the layers, or to dig deeper in trafficking in the domestic field, is much more difficult.
Yeah. And what about numbers? Are there statistics that are kind of reliable you can use in your work?
Not official statistics not they, and they are not going to be called trafficking. But we do have our office. We have documented cases on trafficking in different forms. And we came up with a forced marriage, for example, with the domestic labor, with the forced, with the begging, with refugees, for example, being forced into sex labor or sex work in general. So there's no official, like in the category of trafficking, you will not find it so far. But we work closely with the commission, or with the National Commission on Combating Trafficking and Illegal Migration. We work closely with them on how to, first of all, enact the law. It's 64 for the year 2010, and also to raise awareness among prosecution on how to use this law as a tool to prosecute. Actually, to prosecute and defend and protect girls in that sense, instead of looking at them as defendants in certain cases.
So this is actually a problem, everywhere, is that there's a huge lack of reliable quantitative statistics and numbers, because the crime is very complex and it's always hard to detect, and there's also a lack of coordination among the different stakeholders on the ground to work together in order to finalize the numbers. It's very complex everywhere, and that's what hinders our work on the ground. So what do you say, like, what are there any other organizations that work on human trafficking under the label of human trafficking in Egypt, or is it all under the label of other causes and issues?
No, there are some other organizations, like I know the Doctors Without Borders, they do work on that.
Mhm.
It's not called Solace, it's called I think the Catholic Relief as well, they work on that.
And local
Care and,
organizations, because
I'm sorry?
these are all international organizations, just like
Yes, they are mostly, they are international organizations.
any local organizations.
Yes, there is one called the El Shehab, I believe they also work on trafficking.
Yes.
But the thing is, most of other local organizations, they work within the framework of family laws, for example. And the other thing is, we were among, or we even initiated such work in the field of trafficking in Egypt as an organization. We were the first people to, or one, I don't want to brag and say we were the first, but we were among the first organizations to speak of trafficking in this sense, in that sense specifically.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, also very few organizations work on trafficking with that, framework as well.
Yeah, that's very important and well done.
Mm,
It's really, it's an undercovered topic, and it's still not getting the attention it deserves.
mhm.
So, what do you say today to our viewers who are youth, to encourage them to work on this cause? Because I want to see more youth involved in this work,
Yes.
on all levels. So, what do you say to them?
Well, I would say that get familiarized with the context of each cause. Sometimes a certain family problem is not what it seems. It has much more layers than you think.
Mm.
And you need to take action. This is very important. Protection, even sometimes if the survivor or the people who's being subjected to violence is refusing that help because they just refuse, or they don't have the information that they are under such refused, please take an action. Please tell them that what they are going through is not the normal. This is not what um, to work, and then the fruits of this labor to be given to someone else by force or by emotional exploitation, for example. This is trafficking as well. So please get familiarized with the aspects of the three pillars of trafficking. That's just exploitation and force, and sometimes it's the kind of what kind of forms it gets, the trafficking gets.
Yeah.
Get familiarized with that, report and talk to people, and the most important thing, tell the survivors and act as a supportive to the survivors, that they are not alone, that you're going to fight with them. Even by fighting is to refer them to the organizations working on that topic. This
Yeah.
is extremely helpful for them.
Yeah. And is there a hotline in Egypt?
For trafficking, no, I think now you have to no, you have to send a message through Facebook to the commission.
Okay.
Or we, as an organization, we have our hotline as well, or different hotlines. Actually, it's our phone numbers.
Okay.
So you can, and we're reachable through our Facebook as well, Center for Egyptian Women's Legal Assistance. You can find us all the way.
Okay. Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you so
being
much.
with us. And please keep up the great work, because we need more people like you. And yeah,
Thank you.
we'll keep in touch and hopefully work together in the future.
Hopefully, yes, we do. We look forward to that. Thank you so much. Thank you, Racha, so
Thank
much.
you. Have a great evening. Bye bye.
You too. Thank you. Bye.